Welcome back. Now on The Viewpoint today, let's talk about issues, economy and politics. Now, Kenyan, where we stand. Yesterday, Senate raised the country's debt ceiling to 10 trillion shillings, and that is expected to be effected in the next financial year. How is it going to affect your pocket as a taxpayer? With me in studio, I have Gochechi Logut, who is an economist and IC asset management, as well as Dr. Joseph Rotich, who is not a stranger in studio, but is an economist as well and a political analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The debt ceiling stands at 10 trillion shillings. Let me start with you, Dr. Are we going to sustain this as a country?
I think although we have come of age, we've been talking about 7 trillion, then 9 trillion, now 10 trillion. And we have struggled as a country to be where we are today. And most definitely, Kenyans must live by it. Whether it is going to be achievable or reality or not, Kenyans must live by it. And it is going to be very difficult, although now that we are talking today, we are having the taxable capacity of Kenyans has reached the limit, or even is beyond the limit. The few taxable capacity that we have actually is overtasked. And thinking about any additional cost of tax, actually it is counterproductive, although, because most Kenyans will have to pay with the high prices. Because the government will always be striving to make sure that they tax to the capacity to carry their own activities. And of course, when you look at even the current big promises that the candidates are actually making, some of them may not be sustainable. And in this case, we may just round it up as part of the campaign gimmicks, which in reality, it will be very difficult.
Okay. Churchill?
Thanks. I think it's previously we are not looking at a debt limit or debt ceiling in aggregate terms. It used to be like in relative terms, like a 50% of GDP. So when we pivoted into this regime whereby initially it was 9 trillion past 3 years ago, and now we're looking at an increase by another 1 trillion to 10 trillion. I mean, it's something It's something that we have to live with it. I mean, it could be anything. We just need that. I think the rationale for this was some fiscal space for the next financial year. Bearing in mind by the end of this financial year, which is ending by next week on Thursday, it's estimated it will be at 8.6 trillion. But however, the budget for the next financial year, the financing is around 860 billion shillings. So there's that space to borrow more. So it's quite meaningless. I mean, the increase, if you look at it from that sense, that it has to be increased, yes, at least to be able to ensure that Treasury has some borrowing space.
Yes.
But that said, the issue is not even the debt that we accumulate, but what the transparency around the debt and also what our debt gets into. So that's mainly the elephant in the room.
Exactly, because when you talk about the transparency bit of it, you remember what President Kenyatta said during Madaraka Day. It's not about borrowing, it's about what you're doing with the money. How clean the government is so that the effect and how the expenditure is undertaken during with the kind of debt that you have is what matters here. But the question is, do common mwananchi know the effect of the 10 trillion shillings that has been put on a cap by the Senate?
The Senate,
yes.
I think, what we need to understand, the upper limit that they are actually putting it, as to the much we can borrow as a country. And then we also talk about how the money will be used, or how the same funds will be used. Although when we talk about the borrowing, are we about to meet the long-term needs or the short-term needs? And in this case, if it is the long-term, although you are talking about the infrastructure, which of course it will take some time for people to feel it. As at the current law, we are talking about the massive infrastructural development that this country has actually developed. That has achieved as of now. But how much of it has trickled to the common man? That is why most of the people at the moment are saying that the government has done very little. Because they rarely count what we have achieved through the infrastructural development. They rarely see what we have achieved by making a lot of saving, especially on our roads. So those are some of the things that will take a long time for the people actually to appreciate. Because what the people want, and that is why this, if you listen to the current campaigners, they are saying that we want to put the money in the pockets. What does that translate? They have actually studied what the people feel, the feeling on the ground. And how can we translate this huge infrastructural development into cash in the pocket? That is indirect in this way, because if we make a lot of saving on our roads, if we make a lot of saving by putting up the structures like electricity, the structures like, those things that we need on a daily basis, if we have to develop. So these are the things that are not directly benefiting the people. And what the people want now is a direct benefit. What are we going to get out of this loan? How the government will invest, that will translate into cash as an immediate effect of the loan itself. Otherwise, how much the loan is going to be borrowed, how long it will take to be paid, and how it will be paid depends entirely on the plan itself, on how this money will be used.
What's the take on that, Cheshel? Because do common Mwananchi have a visible, tangible deliverables even after the borrowings?
It's hard to pinpoint.
Right.
It's quite fuzzy because some of the loans that we get, some of them are in project loans, whereby probably there's a bridge that is being constructed somewhere or a road somewhere. And then you get one of the lenders, and then they directly lend to that specific project. So, but by and large, those ones are quite few in numbers. So a large proportion of the loans that you've been getting lately, or the debt that you've been carrying lately is now into budget support. It's quite a vague issue. You really can't pinpoint the projects that will benefit from those budget support loans that comes from the IMF. We are within the 38-month program with the IMF. Each and every 6 months they give us some monies, but we can't really see which projects exactly it gets into. So for Mwananchi, I think they are living with the consequences of the higher borrowing. Remember that in the budget, when you come to the budget, debt servicing is the first charge in the budget. Before even you start paying salaries, before you even start the development expenditure, you have to ensure that the debts as they come due have to be paid out first. But if you look at the proportion of the debt servicing, both the interest costs and also the maturities, as a proportion of the revenues that will raise even in this current financial year that is ending, we're looking at something in the order of 6-7% of the ordinary revenue. And even if you get into the next financial year, another 65%. So that means that the balance, 33%, is now left to salaries, operations and maintenance. That's on the recurrent side, and also more debt now for the development expenditure. So that is now the consequence of the debt that we've accumulated so far, 8.4 trillion up until March this year. So we need to service that, and it's now taking a huge component of the budget. And so that's where we are. Mwananchi are just feeling that pinch of
Daktari, what's the ripple effect in the common Mwananchi's pocket?
In fact, what is going to happen on law, we are going to face it very rough. Why, as my brother Zakele explained, that much of this loan will go to the servicing of the loan itself, and very little for development. So that means we have to borrow to fill in the potholes that we have already created out of the loan. And in this case, we are not going to build any new structure or any new development as per se. And in this case, what is going to happen is that the lives of because there will be no meaningful development. As much as we are talking about the meaningful development, there will be no meaningful development, because much of the money that we are going to get out in form of loan, we are going to use the same money to service the loan, a whole chunk of it. And then you go recurrent expenses, things like salaries and all the other things. And of course, the many promises that the current leaders have actually put in place. I mean, there will be a lot of expectations from Mwananchi to put money into their pockets, but where to get that money will be a tall order or law. And you may find that since this will not be achievable, the next election after this one, it will not be as it is today, because much of what has been done will not really commensurate what these people actually will have promised. And that is why the next president of the Republic of Kenya is going to face it rough, even in meeting the very promises that they have actually made. And of course, the lives of Kenyans will be unbearable. Although based on what we are seeing at the moment, the kind of the magnitude and the extent of the load that we are going to pay as a country, it will be unimaginable. It will be unimaginable. And of course, life will not. We are not expecting life in Kenya to be, easy. Very soon, because what we need to law is that if we have to have the ripple effects of this loan, that means it must be put into investments that will benefit people direct. that will really enhance the business, that will enhance the capacity building as far as the finances are concerned, as far as the know-how on how people actually will carry their business. Because it is not enough, although to avail money to the public, without really capacitating them in the know-how on how to carry out their business. So we have to look at, before you give out the loan, you must capacitate these people first. They have to know what they are going to do. And of course, making new startups in business, yes, it is very easy. But sustaining those businesses into tangible benefits in the end, that will now translate into, the positive effects of the loan itself. It is not going to be easy or low. Kenyans must face or brace for the tougher times ahead of us.
Sashi, you know, Senate passed this. They took a recess and they were recalled for a special sitting. And 27 out of 47 senators voted. That is the number. And there was no abstinence, and then as well there was no zero abstinence and only 3 nays. How important was this for the next government, for this bill to be passed?
Well, to the extent that now the next government will implement the budget. We just passed the budget just before, was it last month or early this month? I forget. But in any case, on the financing, we're looking at an aggregate of 4 trillion. And then we, on the total expenditure is 4 trillion for the next financial year. But then how to finance that budget? We have the taxes on one hand, and then we have the borrowing. So now this borrowing amount in net terms, not even in the gross terms, in net terms, that's the 860 billion. So just working the numbers, it's estimated by next month, next week, as we close this financial year, the public debt stock over the years will have hit 8.6 trillion shillings. So if you are adding another 800 billion, we'll be at 9.6 trillion by the end of the next financial year. But remember, the public debt limit was at 9 trillion. So that meant that either the borrowing should be scaled down at least to be within that 9 trillion shillings, so just a maximum of 400 billion shillings to be borrowed in the next financial year, or and that will meant even reducing on the expenditure side. At some point when this budget was being discussed, that was the proposal by the Budget and Appropriation Committee, that they scaled down the financing, but because of some pushback, or Treasury said that they may not have some financial space, so they had their way. And even in National Assembly, that's where it was initially passed, this borrowing ceiling, the raising from 9 trillion to 110 trillion shillings. So that was passed like 2 weeks ago, amidst also some pushback from some of the MPs. So even as by the time it was getting into the Senate, it was more or less like a formality. And even the numbers is confirming that close to 90% of the 30 MPs who voted for that, they voted to pass that, to raise that debt ceiling. So, but that being the case, as I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to pass the debt ceiling, but it's another thing, the debt that we're incurring, where is it going into? As Dr. mentioned earlier on, and what Treasury has said along, that for every capital investment that they are getting into, the rate of return is 10%. So if you look around, pick any capital investment project that Kenya has gotten involved into the last couple of years. Can we sit and say that that rate of return is 10%? Like if you invest 10 billion, do you get like a 1 billion in return in any given year? The answer is no. So that is where the crux of the problem. We are getting into so many projects which we are ostensibly financing by debt, but you're not getting that commensurate return, and that's where the problem is.
Doctor, where will we get the money from?
We will get the money from both domestic and the foreign. And what we are actually looking forward to seeing the government actually doing is to borrow cheap loans. Because initially, although the government highly indebted itself with a commercial loan, that's why the ripple effect of the commercial loan has actually multiplied the kind of loan that we are paying now. It is so much. So by the time when the government now came back to the local, domestic borrowing, it has also caused another negative ripples. Because when the government actually borrows from the domestic market, it means they are denying the locals actually money from our local banks. Why? You know, what the banks are actually investing in, they are investing in securities, which of course the public or most Kenyans actually cannot afford to offer those securities, which the government can give. So in this case, much of what the government is getting out from the local institutions it has a negative effect, and like when they are getting actually from the international donors. And even when we have to go to the international donors, if we go to IMF, we go to World Bank and all this and that, they always give their loan with a lot of concession. I mean, their loans is actually cheap.
Yeah.
But of course, even though they are cheap, they are also difficult to get. Because when you go to the local, when you go to the international or market, you can easily get the loan. Like now, ask anybody else, if you ask somebody that, will you still go for the loan in China, they'll tell you yes. Because what the Chinese people have done, they have actually, they have given security to their local banks to offer to international the countries, so that they can reap out of that. So there are people who are ready with their cash to give us. But how far that we are going to pay that cash is something different. And of course, whether it was necessary to raise the debt ceiling or no, there is no government, even as of now, and even in the future, that is not going to borrow to sustain itself. As it is now, we are talking about the 9 trillion. The 10 trillion, to me, it is a very small thing, because what the parliament had actually thought about, they were thinking about raising the debt, to 12. Which, of course, to me, it was going to be a good and a sizable space to allow the next government to borrow the money. But even 10 trillion, it will not meet the demand of what the current presidential candidates are actually promising. So in this case, 10 trillion is still low. I was looking at, a tangible figure of 12 trillion.
According to Dr. It may sound too low, but to the common mwananchi, 10 trillion is mouth.
Let me tell you, I'm talking about, based on the problem, based on the pattern that the country, the pattern that the country is actually facing as it is now. Even raising to 10 trillion is just a token. It is a small thing. What I'm seeing for the next government actually to be able to move forward tangibly, they have to raise it to 12 trillion. That is the debt rate.
12 trillion. Chachel?
Interesting.
And how much is too much?
Yeah, that's another thing. Remember that, back to the point, because each and every financial year, there's some aspect of borrowing that we have to incur. So for the next financial year is 846 billion, which ideally takes us to 9.6 trillion. Actually,
to plug the budget, the deficit.
Yes, to plug the deficit, So it's taking us to 9.6 trillion by June 2023. So that means that even there's just space for 400 billion for financial year 2023 to 2024. But my thinking, and even that's the question that I had, when this debate around the debt ceiling, because it started creeping up as early as December last year, because they had already anticipated that this will come out. And that's something that keeps on cropping up whenever we have this debt ceiling regimes with the debt ceiling in absolute numbers. So what Kenya Treasury, they promised IMF, remember that we're within an IMF program, they said that they'll actually do a debt anchor, whereby they'll ensure that our debt as a percentage to GDP is 55% in present value terms, something like that. And even they had made the intention that they will make some necessary legislation to at least to ensure that rather than doing this absolute terms, they just ensure that there's a debt anchor, 55%. So even right now, I think we're at 68%. So at least to ensure that there are measures that 3 years, 4 years down the line, we ensure that it's come down to 55%. So that's the anchor, and that was the thinking around that. I don't know what made them now pivot back to this 10 trillion like a month ago, but that's actually their intent with the IMF was that they need to move away from this absolute number to a relative number, 55% of GDP. But that said, right now, public debt public debt as a percentage of GDP is way above. So the intent, of course, probably is to grow the GDP number so that percentage will now come down over the years.
Yeah, because the country's nominal GDP stands at 10.12 trillion. Yes, 12 exactly. Trillion, so that's way above that GDP. But then, Dr. Does common mwananchi really understand what this 10 trillion really is?
In fact, the local mwananchi is already suffering. We are working across law in our day-to-day operations, and the feeling of the common man has reached the limit. And you talk about the inflation of very essential goods like fuel, like unga, like all these things. They are already feeling. And you know, that is exactly where the government is actually taxing. The government is aiming those things which are very essential in life. And for them, because they know that it will be a mass that people will buy these things. And that is where they'll get a highest revenue in these cases. If they have to collect revenue, they must go essentials.
Yeah.
And going essentials, that means the prices of those essentials must go up. So that is why, even as we are talking today, the fuel level, it is actually driving the transport business out. And of course, that also will translate into driving the farmers out. Because much of what is used in most of these places are actually fuel. So in this case of law, it is the ripple effect of the inflation rate that we are facing in this country is already being felt. And any further burden on the same will pronounce a catastrophic kind of feeling, or rather position of among the Kenyan people. So in this case, I believe that what was in the mindset of law, you know, many people have actually been, they have demonized the issues of raising the debt ceiling. And that is why there's a subtle, what I can say, that kind of increasing a little bit of it, it was actually also with some fear in some quarters, because they have actually condemned that raising this thing further will actually encourage whichever government that will come in place, even to borrow without the care, because even they were complaining that when they raised to 9 trillion, they were saying that they were not imagining that these people were going, the government was going to borrow to that limit. Because previously they were just putting it that level because they knew that this thing will actually continue in a progressive manner. But in this case, the government went on and they made the limit within a short time. So having only about 400, if you have having 9.6, whatever, now we are going 400 billion, cannot make any big sense. So in this case, what the government actually will do, they'll have to, the next government will have to go to the drawing board to renegotiate the payment of this loan if they have to manage the promises that they have actually made. Otherwise, I'm not seeing the 10 trillion mark as sustainable. It may not be sustainable as compared to the promises that these people are actually making. So they may be forced immediately to raise the debt ceilings.
Absolutely. So let's take a break and we come back. You know, the Senate has just voted against the Public Finance Management Regulations, Article 52, to amend that, to raise that to 10 trillion shillings. Okay, let's come back, and we come back, we'll still be crunching more numbers on this particular topic. Let's take a break, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today is numbers, economy. That's what affects you as a Kenyan, all right? So yesterday, the Senate raised the country's borrowing debt ceiling to 10 trillion shillings. And I've got two brilliant minds here, Dr. Joseph Rotich, an economist, as well as Churchill Ogutu, who is also an economist. They understand this better. All right. So let me start with you, Churchill. How much is too much?
Oh, that's a trick question.
Yeah, because even the president asked that during Madaraka Day, that how much is too much?
How much is too much?
Right.
Well, it's an interesting question, but it reminds me of before he got married, and then this person who used to tell us stories about just giving us advice.
Yes.
And one of the things that he told us is that if you get a good spouse, you are complete. If you get a bad spouse, you are finished. And if a good spouse gets the bad spouse, you're completely finished. And that's something that is relatable with the debt. We are told that the debt here is now the good spouse. The debt servicing is now the bad spouse. And now the debt, as it goes up and it meets the debt servicing, that's where it hits the road. And the numbers that we walked you through, even in the current financial year, whereby our debt servicing, both the interest and the maturities, is around 65% of the ordinary revenue.
And that's what really affects most of the jurisdictions, even in Kenya, debt servicing.
Yeah.
Right.
Because ideally, the thinking is that the revenues that we get ideally has to go towards the expenditure for the budget. But if a large proportion of your revenue that we get in our country, the taxes, is going to service the debt, that's a problem. So that is where we are as a country, that, okay, probably we have incurred too much debt to the extent that now servicing debt is now gobbling a large proportion of our taxes. And that's something that even the Daktari said, that probably initially we used to borrow in concessional terms. With concessional terms, we used to borrow from the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF. With those loans, you'll pay over 50 years. Actually, there's a loan that was incurred in 1972 that is still in our external debt books, which is maturing this year. So that's a 50-year loan. So a loan that was incurred for concessional terms is for a longer time period. There's also a grace period, and also the interest rate is like below 1% or 2% to the maximum. So at least that you can be able to absorb. Even if you borrow much, you can be able to absorb even in terms of debt servicing. But over time, we have come into commercial terms. Commercial terms even by borrowing locally. And probably some people tend to see Eurobonds is now the commercial debt.
Yes.
But also borrowing locally is commercial terms. There's a bond that was issued, an infrastructure bond for 18 years, which is maturing in 2040. So for the next 18 years, we'll be paying 13.7% on that debt.
Yeah.
So for somebody, for the government who borrowed, say, for every 100 shillings, 13 shillings will be servicing that loan, and then at 2040, they'll pay back that 100 shillings. So that's the problem. But comparing with the concessional terms, I mean, you'll be paying like one shilling for every 100 shillings you borrow. So that's
for a period of 50 years
for
or so years.
50 years. So at least that more or less is in concessional terms. So the thing is, now our local borrowing is actually much, much more. If you look at that debt servicing, a significant chunk of that is in local borrowing. We borrow more locally at expensive rate, above 10%, and that now gobbles a huge chunk of our debt servicing cost. That's a problem. Yeah, in terms of, if you look at it in terms of the external borrowing, a bit concessional, a bit of that comes with some conditions. You need to do this, you need to fire a few people here and there. Yes, it's that mix of the borrowing, that's where the problem is. But that said, in terms of the debt servicing, whereby it gobbles much, I think domestic borrowing now takes a big chunk of the slack.
Yeah. Does it have an effect to local lenders?
You know, Olo, the capacity of our local institutions is based entirely on the capacity of getting customers. The more customers that our banks have, the more benefits that they get out of it, because they're in business.
Yeah.
So if we have less of those people who go for loan, because it is a very expensive loan, that means the public will not get anything from our local banks. Now the local banks are now over-relying on the government, because the government can offer tangible securities that they are able to pay that money. And in that case, even the motivation of the banks to have more, the citizens, the local business people, to borrow from them is not there. The taste is not there, because as it is a law, after the corona pandemic, you know, most of the businesses actually openly closed down. And we have got several other debts that have not been realized. You talk about the SGR, a huge investment that this country made a lot of money. Up to today, it's a silent business that we don't know whether it is benefiting, but if it was benefiting, it would be making a lot of ripples. You talk about huge chunk of money that was used for the oil whatever discovery. And that oil discovery is totally quiet. We thought maybe by discovering oil and operating those oil fields could really have a ripple, a positive effects to the country. Those are silent part. You see, much of what we have invested in this country, we don't see them bringing back the benefits that it's supposed to be. And in this case, what we are now relying on are direct loans, direct benefits. Like now, when you look at the kind of infrastructures that we have put in place as a country, and that is why even the current government as much as it has been really working day and night to make sure that to the time when His Excellency the President will exit, he will have actually managed to complete most of the huge projects that he started with. And that may be even the reason why these people have actually raised the debt ceilings to meet that demand. So this money, even though we are talking that there will be some, there will be some borrowing, this is a money that is already fixed. We are just borrowing that money to fix a problem that is already there. It may not make any additional tangible development that we are actually, we are looking at. Because this thing, that is why I was telling you that adding up the debt ceiling to 10 trillion may not make a lot of sense. Because somehow behind the minds of the planners, they are looking at the space, at the rate at which the current infrastructural development has actually reached,
yes,
and the money that is required of them to pay. So this money will just go direct to the debts. So, and in the ripple effect or low at the lower ebb, to the common mwananchi, you cannot say how much is more or low. How much is more if we have reached our level whereby it has become unbearable,
yes,
to pay the loan, where people you find people on the streets that people are breaking down. Most of the families are breaking down because of poverty. Most of the children are dropping out because the parents cannot sustain the school fees anymore. What do you learn out of that? If you go even to the families today or low, the insane rate of most of the family members are at a higher level. You get a lot of people who are killing themselves. Why are they killing themselves? Their lives in general has become unbearable. And that is the feeling or low that we are seeing. Those are the ripple effects of high borrowing. Those are the ripple effects of high taxation. Those are the ripple effects of the kind of lifestyle that we have adopted as Kenyans. So in this case, there are a lot of things that the leadership must look into if this country is to continue. You cannot milk a cow until you milk the blood. It is bad.
All right. Okay. Churchill, so how desperately did the government want this motion to be passed? Because now the government has that headroom to borrow up to 10 trillion. How desperately did the government want this?
Yeah, I think...
having in mind what Dr. just said, that the common mwananchi is feeling, even on this story today, that we don't expect more ugali sosa on our plates.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They had to. It's a matter of they had to borrow, they had to increase that debt ceiling. And that's one of the things that even in the regimes in the US, they also have their debt ceiling, which each and every time they have to increase it.
They can't review it.
Yeah, they keep on reviewing it. Yeah. The only challenge is it brings a bit of some brinkmanship, like in the US, and also what partially started playing out in Kenya. So you find that even executive might be held at random by the legislative. So probably, but that didn't play out in the sense that had legislators wanted some other demands, they would have held the executive at ransom by failure not to increase that debt ceiling.
Yeah.
But increasing the debt ceiling, as we have said, is just to increase that fiscal space, ideally for the next financial year. We're not talking about even 2023, 2024, but just 2022, 2023 financial year. Because for sure, by 2023, 2024, we'll still be at the same point now wanting to increase it to probably 11 trillion or even 15 trillion because this 10 trillion is just feasible within the next financial year.
Yeah.
Because end of this financial year, we're at 8.6 trillion. We add another 800 billion, so it'll be at 9.6 trillion. So that was the necessity that they had to do. But having said that, looking at, we'll still have to borrow that 800 billion. There's a split where we'll borrow from multilateral lenders. We're still within the IMF program.
Yeah.
There are some periodic reviews that we need to adhere to. And one that speaks to people is now the fact that within the IMF program, they are really insisting on a fiscal consolidation. By fiscal consolidation, ideally they're talking about a fiscal deficit, this 800 billion, and then you look at it as a percentage of GDP.
Yeah.
In the next financial year, we're looking at 6.2% of GDP, but ideally it has to go lower, up until 3%. That is what was the convergence criteria within the EAC community, East African community, for us now to be one block, a monetary block. So by 2024-2025 financial year, So that fiscal deficit, how do you achieve it? That fiscal consolidation, how do you achieve it? You either reduce your expenditure or you increase your revenues.
But how will this happen? Because either way you can pick it. How will it, as you put it, with all the promises we are getting on the political podiums right now, does the common mwananchi or even the politicians, are they so much aware of what awaits them in the next financial year?
I don't think they're aware.
Right.
I don't think they're aware.
I think, no normal Kenyan or right-thinking Kenyan cannot tell what will be next year. Because already we are burning up with inflation.
Yeah.
That is something we are no longer casing. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, even at the moment, the prices are increased. Not like those days when we used to have after 1 month, after 2 months on a butter base, mafuta imeongezwa. But it is almost on a daily basis. So in this case of law, when the prices of fuel was increased, the fare got increased. And that one goes directly to the pockets of the ordinary mwananchi. And in this case of law, as much as the current leadership are making tall promises, they are very much aware of what's ahead of them. They are not, I mean, these are people who have been in the leadership and they know where they were in the previous years, they know where they are today. And I can tell you, Lord, even them, those who don't want now the issues to do with the borrowing, they will have to borrow to sustain themselves. They cannot make their promises without borrowing. And in this case, they will still borrow. So what we are actually saying is that Kenyans must brace for the tougher times ahead. And the issue that I'm really worried, Olo, there are some countries who have actually failed completely to pay the international debts, like the Chinese debts. Some of them are being, I mean, most of these countries, they have actually given their airports, say, for example, to be managed by a foreigner to repay the debts. Some of them are talking...
You have to produce a collateral.
Yes, collateral security, because they gave those things as collateral securities. Talk about, even the SGR we are talking about, who is managing SGR? I think it is a high time that the public should know. It is a high time also that the public should know whether we still have the oil fields or no, they are no longer there. I mean, whatever we have invested, the public must know that when we invested this thing, we reap this one. When we invested this one, we reap this one. Or we fail in this one. So that whenever, I mean, it will be very motivating for even the citizens to pay their taxes or additional taxes if they are seeing the real benefits out of what they are actually paying in form of taxes. So in this case of law, I think we are in the most difficult time in our country, especially economically, because much of what we are seeing, much of what we are feeling, much of what we are doing is not even commensurate to what we are actually investing. I really appreciate the current government for the kind of big investment that they did in form of agriculture. I mean, not even agriculture, in the infrastructural development. Because now we are using the best roads. You may think you are in somewhere outside this country, some America or Britain, sort of, the way they have come up with very good roads. That I really appreciate. But the ripple effect is not fell on the ground because these were long-term investments. Now, whichever the government that will come in place, they must look more on targeting personal benefits. I mean, those investments...
Terry, can we survive? Can we survive through our own revenue collection as a country? Is it even enough?
If we are raising, if we are not, we are talking about 3 trillion. We are talking about 3 trillion collection or low. But what we are managing in any year is something not more than 1.4, 1.5 trillion. And the rest are funded by the loan, be it domestic, be it international loans. So even the taxable capacity that we have reached as at the moment or low has become so low that even the government to achieve that revenue that they are dreaming of has become so difficult. And that is why it is becoming very necessary that the government must always borrow. Because the taxable capacity, what we can produce as what we can be taxed as a country is actually decreasing day by day.
Okay, Churchill, you know, even bigger jurisdictions like the US, they also borrow. Singapore, you know, it's all out there. Singapore, China, call them all the big boys, the big lions in the East and in the Middle East. They borrowed. What stops us from borrowing?
Long and short of that is if our expenditure side on the budget is equal to the tax collection, the revenues that we can raise. Because ideally, the financing bit is now the deficit, which if the budget is 3 trillion, and we're just able to raise a maximum of 2 trillion, that 1 trillion is now through borrowing. So in the sense that now we can now be able to reduce our expenditure drastically by a third, from 3 trillion to 2 trillion, which is now equivalent to the taxes we are able. That's where we can say that the budget is balanced and will not be able to borrow more. But is it feasible? We are getting into a new presidency. They have all these kind of promises that they will want to implement.
Yes.
And that means that even the expenditure side has a higher likelihood to go higher, at least to be able to meet these demands of the new presidency that will come in place come August. So it's not feasible that we'll not be able to borrow, but the only way that we are not able to borrow is to ensure that our budget in any given financial year, because I mean the budget has two sides to it.
Yeah.
The expenditure side and the how to finance the budget. So if the expenditure side is purely financed by taxes, that's at a point where we'll not be able to borrow. Yeah.
Tough times ahead. Now, let me give you a history here, gentlemen. Uhuru took from President Mwai Kibaki 1.8 trillion, that was equivalent to 42.8%. The late President Kibaki took from the late Moi. Public debt stood at 630 billion shillings in 2002. And Mzee Kenyatta left it at 1.17 billion shillings by the time he died in 1978. Now, we all appreciate that a lot has changed all over time, from 1978 to where we are right now. The population, the demand, the growth desires, and expenditure has also gone high. But the simple question I would ask you is, are we looking at a situation where the debt ceiling from 10 trillion will come slightly downwards for us to live within our means? Certainly with you, Doctor.
I think, although everything will be possible if we plan well, because we must have some period, or we give ourselves a period of no borrowing, and we make use of what we have. Because already, although we have done much of what was so expensive, and the reason why His Excellency President Kenyatta's regime seems to have borrowed more is that much of what His Excellency the President has done is what was offloaded from the late Mwai Kibaki.
Right.
You see, if we have to go a little bit back, although I can say Kibaki was the father of infrastructural development in this country. He put up the real foundation of the infrastructure that we are witnessing today. And Uhuru came to build on that infrastructure.
So he was a contractor.
Yes, so I mean, I don't know whether he became... So Uhuru really worked on it to make sure that what was laid down as a strong foundation for our infrastructural development by His Excellency the late Mwai Kibaki was also built. And up to today, Uhuru is building on that structure. He has not finished. He'll likely leave it to another one who will come after him. So in this case, much of it, Uhuru has done for the one that was for Kibaki, and he has done for himself. Because when Kibaki's development actually was done towards the late hour, I mean the last 5 years, that is when the ripples of the Kibaki economic plan was actually started to be felt. And it took a lot of time to lay the foundation. Now this type of foundation was now built by His Excellency the President, and he has really done it. That is why when you look at, sometimes I hear people, complaining, during the tenure of His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, a lot of borrowing was done. But they are not telling us how much has it been done with the same loan in that span of about 10 years' time. So in this case, I'm foreseeing a situation whereby the next president may not spend a lot, because much of the chunk of our load was spent in infrastructural development, mainly roads which have been done. We will not be repeating to build those roads. Now, whoever will come now will build on other capacities.
Yes.
Now I'm going towards the personal capacities, individual capacities, individual enterprises. And that is why His Excellency the Deputy President has coined up this thing called bottom-up. Bottom-up means you are addressing the issues of a common mwananchi. And it will be a time, it will be a good time for him, because the infrastructural development has been laid down by His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta. So they will now build on that. And that is why you hear Raila Odinga saying, we shall put up for every household 6,000 shillings. And then we will also develop the capacities. Him is emphasizing on reducing the corruption in the country. That whatever the young chunk of funds that has been going into the hands of individuals in form of corruption will now be translated into development money. And these are the promises that we are getting, Olo.
Yeah.
If those promises are anything to go by, it means that we may go for less borrowing because we don't have now a chunk of mega projects that we are experiencing or rather witnessing today. We shall have reduced the mega projects, and then we shall now go to those projects which are more softer and which can be felt immediately.
All right. You know, that reminds me, because most of these politicians, we hear them talking about it's time to revive the economy. Clearly indicating, because there's that government infrastructural blueprint that each and every subsequent government must adhere to and follow to completion. But then the National Treasury will now have that headroom to borrow almost 846 billion shillings to plug the deficit for the next financial year beginning 1st of July. Now, Churchill, give me a scenario what probably this money could be used for, because we are not hearing of any other mega project apart from whichever is now ongoing. Because when you look at President Kenyatta's time, which is now expiring the next 8 days to go, all the major projects have now almost 80% complete. So what is this amount meant for in the next financial year?
Yeah. A significant component of external borrowing, because that split of 846 billion, 864 billion, yeah, 281 billion is from external borrowing, of which project loans, whereby there's a bilateral creditor, that could be Japan, could be China, or any other nation giving us those donor loans, and then those are specific. There's a bridge that is to be built there. There's a hospital. There's something. So those are project loans. You can be able to pinpoint them, and yet there's a bigger chunk of the external loans which is now program loans. The
yes.
IMF giving us some loans. There's I think also World Bank to an extent in the next financial year. But those ones is budget support. Like, we are giving you this money as the IMF, as the World Bank, but as we give you this money, you need to ensure that you follow these 1, 2, 3 conditions. So those are some of the program loans. When it comes to the domestic borrowing, where we're looking at 582 billion in the next financial year, that's a blanket check. So they come in each and every month. They borrow, like this month they borrowed 75 billion. They also followed with another 25 billion. So for this month alone, they're expecting to borrow 100 billion from the domestic market. How, where those monies goes to is no one's guess. In as much as some of the bonds that are borrowed are classified as infrastructure bonds, where ideally, as per the income tax, it has to go to some specific uses, be it building of roads, be it building of health facilities, be it building of ICT facilities. But no one's for sure can now be able to, like, if you can reconcile that, yes, we raised this 75 billion, and then this 75 billion went to these specific projects, that has never been publicized, and that's the big issue here. I remember 2-3 years ago, Budget Appropriation Committee said that even as they approve the budget, Treasury needs to come up with a specific list of all the projects that will benefit from this borrowing. Like an audit report. Exactly, yeah. Even not necessarily an audit report, like the intention of where the debt will get into, the proceeds of the debt. These are the projects that will benefit from that. Right. But that has not been forthcoming. At least with the project loans, you can now be able to narrow down and more or less get to understand that, yes, this was funded by Japan, by German, Belgium, or whatever bilateral creditors. But now when it comes to the domestic borrowing program loans, I mean, it's a blanket check by Treasury. They themselves know who are the ultimate, or which are the specific projects that benefit from the borrowing. Absolutely. All right, Dr. I'm told that you're running out of time. Within 30 seconds, if you can, is there hope for this country?
Although there is hope. You see, why I'm talking of hope that is there, although, is that we have done a lot as a country. During the regime of His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, much of what has been done, he has actually laid down the completion of mega projects that we are now enjoying as a country. And in this case, what will be done by the next president, they will only go to other sectors which are now more direct to the people, unlike the infrastructural development, which people actually were benefiting directly. So in this case, I'm seeing a brighter future, but it depends also on how the next government will plan. And let me tell you, Lo, the budget that we are having this time, and even the budget that will be used in the next government, is Uhuru Kenyatta's budget. Uhuru Kenyatta may have actually exited the power, but the budget will be his, because these are government programs which must be completed.
Yeah.
So in this case, even though you are talking about 47 to 48 days when His Excellency will exit the power, his impact will be there for the next 1 year, even with this, with another sitting president. Why? The budget has been created, and specific budget. I mean, if you
the next financial year, because it will take the next government almost 1 year to settle.
1 year
so
to settle their own.
Time
so
to go.
Kenyatta will still be with us for 1 year. After the next, after the expiry of this time. I'm telling you, as far as the budget is concerned, we are talking about the government, we are not talking about the individuals. And whatever had been put in place, you cannot create a budget or law without putting up the items. So the government must be very much aware that whatever program that they are going to do, they are meant for specific projects.
Thank you. Churchill, 20 seconds. The next government will take 1 year to settle down. So which means either way they needed this money, because it will take them time to come up with the papers, table them before the Senate, the National Assembly, and then all these motions to be passed. So they needed it badly, right?
Yeah, they needed it badly.
Right.
But that said, I mean, Kenya, we're not at... we are relatively better off if we compare with some other African countries in terms of their debt burdens.
In fact, we're told that we are the 6th largest economy in Africa.
Yeah, we're the 6th largest economy in Africa, and probably our debt burden is not that elevated. There's some countries are at 90% of debt to GDP in Africa, so it's quite bloated, yeah. So I think for the next regime, more than anything else, they need to be more credible in terms of addressing the issues, and also the policymakers, the MPs, the senators will be there. They don't need to put their heads in the sand and just ignore this issue around the debt. They really need to tackle it head on, so that they ensure that these negative consequences don't crop up in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we can talk about matters finance until cows come back home. All right, thank you so much for your valid company. Today we'll be talking about the issue of finance and economy, how it's going to be the look ahead in the next financial year. The 10 trillion shillings debt ceiling was passed yesterday, and now just awaiting for the presidential assent. All right, that's where we leave it at this particular point. Two gentlemen, brilliant minds, Dr. Joseph Rotich, who is an economist, not a stranger here, and a political analyst as well. And joining me in studio is Churchill Ogutu, who is an economist. And let me get it right. IC Asset Manager. Managers.
Yes.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in studio. Let's take a break. When we come back, we still have got much more there with Doreen Arange Okello. Stick around.